Hi everyone, welcome to today's service. And I've had to make this a second version because the first version that I created with 2 songs made it too big to send to anybody. So welcome everyone. Our subject is Daniel and the Lion's Den. There's many people involved in this story, and it's a way for us to assess when we are like those people mentioned. We're going to start with a song. The singer is Lauren Daigle, and her song is Oh Lord, which I think is what you might think of Daniel as he's going through these trauma. I think that's a lovely song, and I often wonder if David was really scared when he knew he was going to be thrown into the lion's den. But what I'm really interested in is thinking about what this means to us today, this story of Daniel and all the characters in it. We'll start with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. So the background of this is that the administrators and the satraps are jealous of Daniel's success with the king Darius, so they look for ways to make him disobey the law. So they suggest that to the king that he forbid the people to worship anyone but him, knowing that would go against David's religion. This was at a time where people often worshipped many gods. They, of course, caught him praying to the Lord. This is Daniel 6, verses 14 to 28. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to the palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he couldn't sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who'd falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den. So not a good ending for them. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he's the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He's rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So this may be a familiar story to you. Were those administrators bad men? Have you ever been jealous of others doing better than you? What do you think about Daniel? Do you think he was frightened? But the Lord came through for Daniel, didn't he? Daniel was a faithful prophet, and later on he'd prophesy what was going to happen to Darius, which wasn't a good fate. So I'd like to read the beginning of this story just to fill in some of the gaps so you can see all the people involved in it and maybe figure out what this might mean for us today. This is Daniel 6, verses 3 to 11. Now Daniel so distinguished himself amongst the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they weren't able to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We'll never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, Your Majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so it can't be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he'd done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So, of course, they reported him to the king. So here's the background about the Medes and Persians law. This Old Testament commandment says, there is to be no other God before my face, means we must not worship any person, dead or alive, as a god. Worshipping people as gods was another practice in the Middle East and in various surrounding areas. The many gods of the nations there were of this type, such as Baal, which some of you may be familiar with the story. I don't know whether it's Elijah or Elisha, but had some issues with the people who worshipped Baal. In Athens and Rome, there were Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, Apollo, Athena, and so on. People worshipped some of these at first as holy people, then as supernatural beings, and finally as gods. The fact that these nations also worshipped living people as gods can be seen from the edict of Darius the Mede, that for a 30-day period no one was to ask anything of God, only of the king, or be thrown into the lion's den. Now, are there times in our lives when something in our life becomes our God? It could be money, addiction, jealousy of others' apparently wonderful lives. When in this state, we're rarely happy because we're never satisfied. The administrators and satraps were like this. They hated Daniel because he was successful and well loved. Of course, they had a bad ending because they ended up being eaten by lions, and really and truly they had already been eaten up by jealousy. So in this story, the lions are bad things. Here's what it says in Jeremiah about them. A lion from the forest was struck. Let me repeat that. A lion from the forest has struck the great men down. A wolf of the deserts has devastated them. A leopard is watching over their cities. Everyone going out of them is torn to pieces, because their transgressions have been multiplied. Their turning away have become firm. Now, clearly that's not a good version of a lion. And this one, another saying from Psalm 17, verse 12. The last one was Jeremiah 5, verses 5 and 6. The wicked is like a lion, he desires to tear, and like a young lion who sits in hiding places. So it would seem that the satraps and administrators had succumbed to the bad lions before they even set foot in the lion's den. What about King Darius? Was he a bad man, do you think? Well, he was certainly enamored of the idea of people worshipping him, wasn't he? Which was not a good place to be. But obviously he felt bad about that because he ended up not sleeping that night thinking David would be eaten by lions. So, we all make mistakes. So I suspect he turned out to be a reasonable man anyway. Very little is said about him. But I feel as though there's many times I succumb to thinking I'm in control of my life instead of the divine, which is what comes from the divine. We don't want to hurt what comes from the divine. Yet that's what happens when we embrace something evil. We make ourselves God and not the divine. Now we come to Daniel. It's apparent that not only is he a good man in what he does, but that he also completely trusts the Lord is looking after him and leading him, no matter what. We may have moments of this, but rarely do we have this feeling all the time. Some of Daniel's trust must stem from his being a prophet. We know a lot of the prophets had a profound belief and knew that God was looking after them. This is from Isaiah, and this is where the picture of a lion is not one, as we've just seen in this story. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion together. and a little child will lead them. And the young cow and the bear will feed. Their young will lie down together. That's from Isaiah 11, verses 6 and 7. Or from Revelation 5, verse 5. Behold, the Lion which is from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book and to loose its 7 seals. Now, Revelation is a complex book of the Bible, and I think very much an allegorical look at humanity. So the take-home message: there are many times in our lives when we feel we're getting a raw deal from the divine, the way the satraps felt. If we act on that and make those feelings ours, then we succumb to the bad lions waiting to trap our lives and make us do evil. Maybe we're foolish and succumb to vanities as King Darius did. Then we end up being devastated about the loss of the good things in our lives and suffer accordingly unless we change. Or we can have our Daniel moments when we know God is with us, looking after us always. All we have to do is believe and follow him. Amen. May God bless you and keep you. May God look after you, your goings out and your coming in. May you feel his face always towards you. God be with you all. Amen.